Hey there, horror fans! Welcome to episode 91 of Funny Book Splatter, a horror comics podcast brought to you by HorrorDNA.com. I am your host, James Ferguson. Now, you may be asking yourself why that introduction sounds a little bit different. Well, that's because Horror Talk recently went through a rebranding, a transformation, if you will. We are now Horror DNA. We don't just talk about horror, it's in our blood. There's all new logos and a brand spanking new website, but everything else is still the same. I am still your go-to guy for all things spooky in the world of funny books. Now, let's dig into this week's podcast, shall we? This week's guest is John Horlsey, the creator of the Eynes, a new anthology series currently on Kickstarter. John has orchestrated an elaborate and impressive setup for this comic, pulling the strings behind the scenes to tell an overarching narrative using short stories from creators all around the world. Each tale looks at different characters from across time that have been fighting monsters for ages. It's pretty cool stuff, and it's clear from speaking to John that this project is in good hands. He's very buttoned up. You can find more about the Eynes and check out previews and the Kickstarter itself at eynesanthology.com. Eynes is spelled E-Y-N-E-S. John can be found online on Twitter as @Y2CL. Alright, let's get right to it then. Here is episode 91 of Funny Book Splatter with my guest, John Horlsey. Cool. So to start us off, how would you describe the Eynes anthology?
So the Eynes anthology, the fastest way I can describe it, and the best way I can describe it is a collection of stories in a world where monsters are attracted to one specific family called the Eynes. And this book tells short stories throughout their timeline and history. So for over a 1,000-year period, we're getting snapshots of different members of the family dealing with supernaturals and monster characters.
I mean, what's not to love about something like that? First off, like I feel like there is there's a supernatural vibe to that. I think that's like the easy way to describe something like that is, you know, you look at the Winchesters and what they do, and that whole family of monster hunters. But right. There's clearly something. There's more to this, and it seems like the word you used was attracted to. So is it like something in their blood or something like that that is that just makes them targets for monsters?
Essentially, so what the idea was is my original concept, and it kind of is full. I've worked on this for 2.5 years, so things have modified a little bit in 2.5 years of working on this. But one of the core things that stayed true is that not only does the supernatural, the monster of the world, you know, are they attracted to this family, but this family is also attracted and aware of and has like this second sense of the supernatural things around them. So the attraction goes both directions. It just goes both directions in different ways, right? In different levels of intensity. Mm-hmm. And it's funny you bring up the Winchesters because I'm a huge Supernatural fan. I watch that show like all the time.
Incredible.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and it's I would definitely thought about the Winchesters as I was creating this book for sure. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so it's not defined what exactly draws the monster to this family and what draws them to the monsters. Not yet, at least. It will by the time we finish this whole thing out, which is that we have a 4-book arc plan for this. But by the time we get to book 4, the reason why they are attracted to each other will be defined. Mm-hmm. But in the first book, really what you're getting 10 stories that set up the world and kind of give you glimpses of what can happen within this world and set up certain characters that'll come into play in future books.
Cool. Now, the setup for this is very interesting because it is an anthology. So are you and you just said you have a 4-book kind of arc planned for this. So how do the stories intersect? Are they all separate stories? Are they featuring? It sounds like they're featuring different characters, but are they all building towards one overall narrative?
So they are and they aren't. So they aren't so much that, and it's kind of a confusing way to explain it, so I'll do my best. We have various writers, various artists, and, you know, various creators throughout this book, and I myself am a writer and artist on some of the stories too. But the way the stories were crafted is I very much crafted the stories to be, hey, for the writers said, hey, give me a time period you want to write in, something supernatural, something horror based. I'll give you characters. I'll give you some snippets of what's happening in that time, and then you go write your story. Bring it back to me, and then the editor and I will then take that story. I'll pair it up with an artist. I'll pair it up with a colorist, and find people to finish the story out, for the book. And then we take those stories and we say, okay, we have 30 stories. We need to pick 10 for the first book. Let's go through the stories, read them, see which ones fit to be more of like this is an introduction type of story to the world, to the characters, and then we create a larger narrative around those stories. That way, I didn't want the stories to feel forced or just to feel contrived to fit into a book. What I wanted the stories to stand alone on their own and then have a loose narrative over top of them. So if you read book one from start to finish, you're going to get a full story arc within it, right? It's going to be a loose story arc on purpose, but there's going to be a full story for all 60 or 70 pages. And then if you read book 2, book 3, and book 4, each one of those books will also have their own story from start to finish, as well as each individual story. And then by book 4, there's going to be a story that the bigger story in each book will wrap up in book 4. So there'll be an overall 4-book story that kind of walks you through each story throughout the whole anthology.
I mean, this is a fascinating way to set something up. It also sounds terrifyingly difficult to organize, because I'm just like, I'm picturing like, there's that picture of like a detective with all those different red strings between pictures of the serial killer and clues and stuff like that. Like, how do you go about organizing something this massive? Because if you're juggling, if you said 10 stories in the first book, so if you're talking about 10, potentially 40 stories altogether, like trying to figure out who goes where and what, all the different, and what that narrative looks like to get us through across different, potentially hundreds of years with different monsters, different characters, like what does that look like? How do you organize something like that?
I have a very, very intense OneNote setup. I mean, it's like 50 pages, and each page has, pictures and notes and links to other pages in it. I mean, it's pretty intense, with checkboxes to make sure we're checking off the same things and things link up and stuff like that. And that's kind of been my detective board with the serial killer, because I'm able to like link from page to page. So I can say, okay, this story connects to this one through these things, kind of stuff like that. And it's been difficult for sure, because I've been working on this for about 2.5 years. And just to make this first book took about 22 creators to get all the stories, all the pieces, everything lined up to do. And it took me and my editor that I brought on, Casey, to go through these stories and to say, okay, we have these stories. Let's build this. I mean, from the beginning, I had in my mind what I wanted the big story to be, right? It was, I laid it out. Okay, and I didn't tell any of the writers what the overall bigger story was going to be, because I didn't want the final story of the whole thing to influence what they wrote about. I wanted their stories to be very organic and very much created by their vision, and then that vision molded into this bigger arc, which again is kind of backwards, but I really wanted to force myself to play with this idea and see if I could make it work. So I've had this overarching vision since the beginning, but bringing on the editor Casey back in August of last year allowed me to take that vision, kind of expand upon it, and find the entry points in these stories, because as I did as a story editor for these books, the creators wrote the stories, the artists drew the stories. I was involved in the process for each one of them, like saying, hey, yes, this works, no, that doesn't work, kind of stuff, but very loosely. But then it allows us to go in over top of them and say, okay, we need to add this to this story to make it fit in this book for overall. To add little elements, not much, not modifying the story, not changing anything, just adding a little something in the background or something, like modifying a little bit of text to make, okay, let's change what this guy says here to mention this. That'll tie it into the next story, even though they're not directly connected, because one story takes place in, say, 1640, and one story takes place in 1950. But this one line of text, to readers who pay attention, they'll catch the connection, And we have little stuff like that connects stories from hundreds of years apart throughout the first book and throughout the other books. And it's really a matter of, it's crafted in a way that each individual short story tells you a story, right? You can just read that and be done. But if you read the whole book, you get a bigger story and you get more clues and more unraveling to what the final book's going to tell you. And the hardest part, I'll tell you, about doing this really hasn't been the story elements. Like, actually doing the story part has kind of been easy. And it's weird saying that, but the hardest part has been wrangling and finding all the creators that I wanted to work with and get them into this book, because I had a very specific vision of how I wanted this book to look, and I specifically wanted the art in the book from story to story not to be the same. I wanted each story to have its own feel, and finding 10 to 40 artists that draw differently yet really well and are able to tell a story, and differently in so much as, like, I mean, a lot of people have their own style, but I mean differently as in, one's a watercolor artist, one does traditional comic style, one does more horror comic style, just different types that are drastically different enough to where it's like, yes, this is definitely a different person doing this, but it fits the story. That was the hardest part, is to find people, one, within my budget, because everybody got paid before the book's going to Kickstarter. I paid everybody out of my pocket first, because I wanted them to know I was serious about this book. I'm putting myself in front of it, putting all the risk on me, letting everybody else get paid up front. So one, the creators that are working with me know, hey, this guy is serious about it. And two, if it does fail for whatever reason, the people who worked on the book have already gotten paid. They're not going to get gypped out of any money. And that was
also puts you in great standing overall, because then if you when you come to do the next project or the next project, they know, hey, this guy paid. You didn't work for exposure, which is a huge help.
Exactly. Yeah, being a creator myself, I'm like, no, I don't want you to work for exposure. I don't want you to work for if it funds, I'll pay you. I want you to work for you like the story, you like the book, and you're getting paid up front.
That's all good.
So, it was that was the hardest part, is finding the people I wanted to work with that did styles that I liked and were in my budget, because again, I'm married with 5 kids. I can't pay pro rates, but I can definitely pay rates that are acceptable to people. So
it sounds like you have to start getting your kids to start drawing. So that'll be the key, right?
Right. My 7-year-old daughter, she draws pretty damn well. I mean, she's doing pretty good. She brings home, she went to an art class and she brought home this painting of Beauty and the Beast of Cogsworth, and it wasn't Cogsworth. Cogsworth, she did a sculpture of Cogsworth. She brought home a painting of Chip, and she was like 6. You can tell who it is, and it's very detailed. I'm like, you keep up on this. I'll use you someday.
So what's your page rates like? What's that?
Right. How much you charge? She's like, I don't know.
Yeah, right. You get 2 desserts. There we go.
Yeah. Extra. Right now she'd go for that. So.
So now what I'm also curious about, like, so this is an idea that you had. You're the creator behind this. Like, as a writer and artist yourself, why farm it out to other creators? I know you just said you wanted different styles for each one, and that I can understand about having different artists on the book, but you have other writers involved as well. So how'd you come to a decision like that?
Well, because I wanted to have different voices in the book, because in the real world, things that are thought of and done 100 years ago are not the way people think today. So if I'm writing everything, then not that it couldn't be done, right? Then I have to put myself into the mindset of all these different time periods, which is, one of the fun things about writing. However, if I get writers from across the world, from different backgrounds than me, I've got a writer coming out of Nigeria. I've got a writer from England, from Australia, from Ireland, from Canada, all across the U.S. And I have these people from different backgrounds who have different histories to me. They're going to approach a story differently than I will. And they're going to make for a more diverse and more interesting book than I felt at the time that I could do by myself. And I figured, since the nature of the book is a bunch of short stories, it lends itself to a bunch of different voices telling one bigger story.
But you're also controlling, pulling the strings a bit in the background to be able to say, okay, like this goes here, and then you're putting those pieces together. So I think some of my favorite anthologies have that kind of central voice that does go through, whether it's, a bunch of different pieces that as you get along in the story, you start to see all those connections and see how they're all in the same world, like things like Nightmare World from Dirk Manning or Twisted Dark from Neil Gibson. Like, those are things that they're all written by one person and handled by a bunch of different artists, but you can see how, they start kind of spread out and they start to really come together.
Yeah, exactly. This is doing it from a standpoint of different voices, different artists, with the overall narrative tying them all together, which is a lot. It's a lot of fun to work on this. To be honest,
sounds it. I mean, well, first off, like, if you're that, you have that passion behind it. If you're putting the time and money into it, like, that's gonna be kind of like the difference in there. Because if the fact that you've already paid for everything is a huge change. Like, you rarely see that in the industry, so I think that's really helpful. Like, too often you see things like, oh, we're raising money to pay the artist, but no, they're already paid, and that's really. That I think puts you a leg up with a lot of that stuff. Shows that you've already put skin in the game.
I think so. Yeah. I think so too. Yeah, I put skin in the game, and it was important to me too, because, like, before I started this project, I talked to my wife and I was like, "Hey, I have this idea for a new comic book." She's like, "Okay, cool." And I pitched it to her, and she was like, "Oh, that sounds really cool." And I was like, "Yeah, I want to pay all these people up front." She's like, "You want to do what?" I'm like, "Well, I want to make sure I want to pay them up front before we go to Kickstarter, because I don't want to have them waiting on it." And then we talked it out. We looked at our finances. She was like, "All right, go for it. Here's we worked out a budget for the book of what we could afford, over the course of the 2 years we worked on this." And she's like, "All right, here's the budget." And I was like, "Perfect." So I went forward with that, and I clearly went over budget because that's what I do. But we got some great creators in the book, and we got some amazing stuff. And I think, like you mentioned earlier, it's definitely going to set up to where when I'm doing the next book, I'll be able to get more people in the book, because it's going to be easier, because this guy pays up front, because that's important to me as a creator myself. And I feel if you're working on something like this, or any book really, if you're not willing to put the risk on yourself, if you're the main guy behind it, if you're putting the risk on your creators, I don't personally like that. I feel like that you do work, you get paid, and then the risk goes to the person who's paying you.
We need more people with that mindset in the industry, unfortunately. Now, what kind of monsters are we talking about in the Eynes anthology here? Like, what or are we talking like your traditional ones in terms of werewolves, vampires, that kind of stuff, or is it little of this, little of that?
It's a little of everything. So we tried to stick to more of the. I didn't put any limitations on the creators of the writers of what kind of monsters they could do. I mean, they pitched me their ideas of what they wanted to work on, and I didn't really say no to anybody. I said, hey, if you're doing that, think about these kind of things. We have a story with vampires in it, not in the first book, but it's going to be in the third book. Actually, we have a story. It's actually done all the way to the art stage already. But we have stories. The first book deals with things like demons and skinwalkers and just evil people that are possessed and stuff, stuff along those lines. It does a lot more with the cerebral type of stuff. And, that was on purpose to a degree, strictly because we wanted to set up a world in the first book to where things are not as they seem. And it was important to set that up because we have characters that go on very interesting character arcs through all 4 books, and setting it up to where that there's things that are going to be changing, and that what you think at the beginning of a story is not what's going to happen at the end of a story was important to set up the whole series. So the first one really deals more with possession, demons, skinwalkers, stuff like that. And we get more into the actual monsters in books 2 and book 3.
Cool. I mean, it sounds like you have everything kind of laid out there. I guess how many of the stories within these 4 different collections are already completed?
So the first 10 in the first book are done. Book 2, we have scripts for 8 of the 10, and we have art for 5.5 of the 10, or the 8 scripts done. Book 3, we have 1 script set for that book 3 with the art already done for that, and book 4 is not being worked on until we finish book 2, just because we don't want to pick the final book stories until we have at least half of the books done. But we also have about another 22 scripts that are completed that we're going through and deciding where we want to put them, what we want to do with them. And I mean, we're going to have scripts left over that don't make the cut. That's just going to happen in these 4 books.
That's what that is.
Right. But on the good side, all those creators who wrote scripts are getting paid for their scripts. So they're not like they wrote nothing for nothing. They're still, even if we don't use them in one of the 4 books, they still got, they still got paid for it. But so we're working on those scripts. I have probably 3 scripts that aren't in a book that have finished art, just because I either drew it myself, or I was like, I like this script. I don't know where I'm going to do it yet, but I want to get it drawn now, kind of thing. So really, book 2 is already halfway done, and it's once we get into this Kickstarter for the first book, and assuming it hits goal, we're going to jump right into book 2 after it's done.
That's awesome.
You get that finished up.
Speaking of Kickstarter, I mean, is this your first experience with the platform? Do you have any issues or concerns as you dive into it?
This is my 3rd time doing a Kickstarter, but it's my first time doing one of any substance. So I did 2 of them back in 2015 that were just like $300 goals, $400 goals. I mean, they were just cheap for a single issue of a webcomic that I did back then, And they both funded, and they both hit. One of them hit stretch goals, and they did well. Did enough to fund, give me books to sell at shows and stuff like that. But this one's got a much larger goal because we're going for a bigger size book, higher quality printing, and we're trying to print 1,000 copies. And what the 1,000 copies does is it allows me to give everybody who backs the book gets a copy, but that will allow me to send a certain number to each creator on the book, because I decided, even after I paid him, what's the fun of working on a book if you don't get a copy of it, right?
Yeah, I had something similar. I have a 5-pager that was being shopped around, and they're like, oh, we could put it in the book. I'm like, oh, cool. So there's no payment, okay, but wait, I'm like, do I get any copies? Probably not. I was like, what's the point? I would have to buy my own copies of the book. Right. I feel like that's going to be a shitty thing to do.
Right. I think so too. So I'm going to be sending, depending on how much we fund, every creator is going to get at least 2 copies of the book, 1 to keep, 1 to sell. And if we can fund enough, I'll be sending up to 5 copies to each creator as comp copies for them to keep, 1, give away, or sell, whatever they want to do with them. So that's why we're pushing for 1,000. That also gives me some to sell at cons and on the website and stuff going forward. And that the money we raise off of selling those books is going to go to funding books, 2, 3, and 4.
You've done all your homework. This is so good to hear. You came to it with a very professional thing. This isn't our approach to it. It's not like, well, I want to make a comic book. Won't this be cool? We're just going to throw it all out there. No, it's very much like you could see like you made a budget. Yeah, okay, you said you went over the budget, but you have all this planned out in terms of where you want to take this. Yeah, it's for books, but you have everything kind of laid out in that way. Like that should resonate with the crowd. Like you can back this with confidence, knowing that like the book's done.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of getting it printed now. So that's awesome.
Yep. Yeah, we want to get confidence there because Casey and I have been working on this like every day until like midnight every night, just to try on the back end stuff, on stories, on editing, on the Kickstarter, on promotion stuff. We wanted to make sure that, one thing we want all 4 books to come out, and our plan is, because we're working ahead, book 1 will be done, goes to Kickstarter. In 3 or 4 months after it finishes, we'll be able to go for book 2, and our whole goal is to have all 4 books out and done in about a year and a half. So we got an aggressive plan here, but I think doing like, a little more than quarterly release schedule for this gives breathing time between Kickstarters and allows us to finish them. And again, like we're already ahead. I mean, we could, if we really push ourselves, we could finish book 2 in the next month and a half, Yeah. It's just a matter of we want to get it right, and we want to put that time in between to finalize it. And hopefully this for book 1 resonates with readers and they want a book 2, and then that'll push us more to get it done. And I've already signed on. So for book 1, we have Scott Godleski drew a story for us.
Oh, he did Copperhead. He did a bunch of stuff with Superman.
Yep, Superman and Batwoman and Green Lantern. Yeah, he did a story for us for this first book, and then for book 2, I just signed last night with Drew Moss, who I don't know if you know who he is, but he did Copperhead Volume 3.
Yeah, and he did he just did a book.
A werewolf book. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Was it How to the Moon or something like that?
Maybe. Yeah, Drew Moss, right?
Yeah.
I know I just read like some other book by him that I was like blown away by the artwork, and now I'm like taking a minute to like his stuff is incredible.
His art was he did a cover for The Crow, a Stan Lee variant cover, and I bought the art for it. It's like I was like, I have to have this, Drew. How much you want for it? And I bought the art for it. And last night I finalized with him that he's going to be drawing a 6-page story and it's going to be hopefully in book 2.
That's great. I just looked up. He did Road of the Dead, which is a book that it's through IDW from Jonathan Mayberry. It's like a prequel to George Romero's last movie. But it's
nice.
It's a zombie story, and there's just like an army dude with a tank and a bunch of like Mad Max guys. It's like The Walking Dead with Mad Max kind of style.
Yeah.
It's great stuff.
Yeah, and his artwork is so clean and so good. I love it. So I was pretty happy about that. And also yesterday I signed on just to do like a poster for us. Ron Randall, the guy who does Trekker, he came on. He got signed on last night to do a pinup or a poster for us, which is pretty cool.
That's great. Yeah, and then hopefully you tap into all those guys have some established followings too. So hopefully they help spread the word about the project, because that's good stuff.
There was definitely a strategic element to bringing on creators when I signed people on originally, of thinking, how do you promote a book that nobody knows about? Well, if it's an anthology and you're working with people, a side effect of that is they all have their own followings.
Yeah,
which is great. I don't
know if you call it side effect, but it's that implies something bad. A benefit,
right?
Yeah.
There you go. Benefit's a way better word than side effect. Sorry.
Now, I guess what about monsters? Like, why is it that what kind of drew you to a story like this? Is that I'm also curious, as a writer / artist, is this something that you kind of just always wanted to draw, or have you drawn a lot of these in the past, and you're like, I want to do more and more about these kind of creatures?
So I grew up drawing all the time as a kid, but I would either draw one of two things. I would draw Superman and Batman, or I would draw the most screwed up crap you've ever seen in your life. Like a guy with his head chopped in half and an arm coming out of his brain, like at 13, just stuff like that. And I was drawing this crazy stuff, like so much so that when I look back at my old artworks, I still have it in a tub, in the garage. I'm like, why did my parents not get me looked at? Like, this is crazy.
We have to talk about John. Yeah.
Yeah. If my kids were drawing this, I'd be like, what is wrong with you? And so I've always been drawing monsters and like goblins and demons and this weird, gross stuff. So much so my wife is like, you need to stop drawing monsters. And I'm like, no, I'm going to lean into it. I'm going to do a book about them.
I mean, have you ever drawn something that scared you then, in that case? Or it sounds like you're drawing stuff that scares your wife.
Yeah. No, not that scares me. Really. I don't really get scared that easily. I mean, what scares me is like, and I'll admit this openly, is like emotional stuff. Like, I'm an emotional guy. Like, I'm not afraid to say that I cry at movies if it's emotional, and I connect with like the stuff about anything involving a dad with cancer.
Oh my God.
Will get me, because my dad died of cancer, and I will, like, we used to watch the show How I Met Your Mother, and the season when Marshall's dad dies of cancer, I literally couldn't watch it. So that stuff gets me, and like freaks me out. Like anything psychological horror stuff with like kids will get me because I have kids.
Yeah. It's funny how your not even priorities, but your what really frightens you changes when you become a parent, and it's stuff that like as a growing up you'd make horrible jokes or you'd laugh at that kind of stuff and things, but like the moment that kid comes out, you're like, nope, everything's different. Like that's completely off limits, and it's like no, that kind of stuff terrifies me.
Exactly. Like my wife, as most people do, watches like those murder mystery shows or like the true crimes. But as soon as it involves a kid, I'm like, I don't want to watch this. Yeah. I don't want to see this crap. But no, I mean, I've written stuff that I've come back and I'm like, man, this is demented. This is messed up. This gets you. But I've always wanted to do like serious horror-esque stuff. Like most of my original stuff that I worked on from like 2003 to 2016 when I was doing web comics and other kind of comics was all like adult humor based, like Kevin Smith movie jokes and like, but I did do 2.5 years of a zombie storyline on my webcomic where it was all comedy horror based stuff. But even when I was doing that, I was like, man, I really wish I could just lean into this and like pull some of the jokes back and make it more cerebral and stuff. But it was, the series was a comedy series, so I had to leave that. I kept that in there. But once I decided to stop doing webcomics in 2016, and I was like, I'm going to focus more on telling long form stories. I wasn't like, want to get out of webcomics. It was more, I want to focus on long form and not stress myself out with a daily or a weekly posting schedule. I want to get the book done and then worry about getting it out there. My first idea was I need to do something that involves monsters, supernatural stuff, or something along that lines. And that started the wheels going on that eventually created the Eynes anthology.
Yeah, I mean that's it's funny how like that kind of stuff, like if whether it's something as a kid or something like that, it can lead in so in such a way that you're like, yeah, I want to do this. Keep doing this, keep leading farther and farther into it. I mean, you said that your webcomic was more about more horror comedy, but I think the line between those two genres is very thin. So you're able to see that, like you probably could rework that a little bit and make it terrifying. It's just, part of it is just timing, part of it is the delivery of something like that, but it's amazing how close those two genres are.
Oh, I agree completely, because most horror movies are part of the reaction when you watch them is you're laughing. Yeah. Right. Like the jump scares or like anything like that. The excitement of what's happening on screen, the horror aspect of it in movies will make you smile and laugh and go, oh my God, that just happened. Stuff like that. So it's the line. Yeah. It's very, very thin.
So, I mean, I guess that's another angle you could take, down the line or something like that too, depending on, where the Eynes journey takes you.
So it's funny you say that. We actually do have a story that comes. It's not going to be in one of the books. It's going to be an extra because it's actually written as a radio play. But it's written by a guy out of England who writes radio plays, and he took it as an aspect of what if one of the Eynes characters hosted a podcast about monsters? And I'm like, let's roll with it. So he wrote a radio play for a podcast episode of a guy talking about monsters, having monster characters call in. And it's total tongue in cheek, totally hilarious, like just comedy. Like there's a whole, this isn't a spoiler for the story, but there's a scene in there where like one of the callers calls in and he's a vampire and he has to go because his dinner is crying out. I mean, it's ridiculous. And he sent that over to me. I'm like, this is amazing. I have to use this. So we're actually working, probably after either during book 2 or after book 2 to put the production together to make that a real thing.
That's awesome. Yeah, and that's like a great extra. That's something unique that you're not gonna really see that in your average Kickstarter. Instead of getting like a print that I'm never gonna use or a bookmark or something like that, I'm gonna you can get something like that will be they'll actually listen to and enjoy.
Yeah, extra story and brought to you in a different way.
Yeah. That's great. I mean, what other kind of, outside of the book, of course, like what other kind of rewards do you have lined up for the Kickstarter?
So the Kickstarter has your basic book rewards. You have the basic book, you have the digital package. We're doing a sketch cover variant where it's like, for a little bit more money, you can get it's a blank cover with the logo on it, and I will then paint or illustrate any kind of monster you want on the front of it, or something from the book. Or if you give me free reign, it'll be something probably pretty epic, because if I have free reign, I'm going to go all out. Mm-hmm. We also have some unique rewards. Like I was able to get some of the original pages from some of the artists, so we're offering those up within the reward as well. What you'll get, you get an original page of art from the book. You'll get the book itself and any kind of extra, like we do have a small print pack and stuff like that, and other stuff that will be included in that. We also have a soundtrack that I've worked out. I've got myself and a couple other groups and bands from around the world to contribute songs to an 11-track soundtrack, one for each story plus one theme song.
Wow.
And the theme song was composed by a guy named Joey Edsel, and it was composed specifically for this book. And if you watch our Kickstarter trailer on the Kickstarter or the one that I sent over to you on the press package, the song underneath the guy talking, doing the voiceover, is the beginning opening part of the theme song that was written for this book.
Wow. Man, like, yeah, this is great. Like, you came together. Like, it really is so much more than like your average kind of Kickstarter, because sometimes I just want the comic, but like to see all those other extra stuff that is, if you're somewhat more interested in this, you want to dig into it a little bit more. There's a lot to uncover there. That's great.
There is, and we have a lot of plans of other places to take these stories and other avenues to get them out there. That assuming this first book goes, we're going to be going down other avenues with book 2s and book 3 and other ways to get the stories out there for people too.
That's awesome. Yeah. So it looks like this is out there. Well, at the time of this podcast release, the Kickstarter will be live. So we'll direct them over to that in the show notes as well. But do you have a website set up for it? Is it just EynesAnthology.com?
Yeah. So if you go to EynesAnthology.com, you can see previews of all 10 stories. You can see who the creators are, what else they've worked on. We have a little bio page set up for each creator and a little about page for each story for book 1. You can also sign up for email updates there on the top bar. But if you go to Eynes Anthology, that's EYNES anthology.com/Kickstarter, it'll take you right to the Kickstarter page.
Great. Yeah. See, that's easy to line up with all that stuff. And, like I've seen a lot of Kickstarters. I've seen a lot of anthology books. This is perhaps the most buttoned up with when it comes to this, especially on an independent one. The book is done. All the stories are done. The Kickstarter is launching. You're gonna get funds to print the thing and get it out there in the world. So, like, this is like a back it with confidence setup here.
It helps that my day job, I'm a program manager, so it's what I do at the day job.
You can use that experience, like, so
right?
That's how you're able to juggle all these things. So I wouldn't be able to do that. Like, I have a hard enough time keeping this you're doing that professionally, and you're able to just go, okay, here's another project.
Right. I mean, professionally, I wrangle people from all around the world for software, so
Hey man, use your strengths. That's it, man. That's
exactly.
That's what's that thing about Robert Rodriguez when he made El Mariachi? He looked around. He's like, all right, I got a turtle, I got a guitar case, and this guy who wants to be an actor. So like he just kind of looked around that, and he's like, all right, cool, we're gonna make a movie, and like that was it. Like
we'll do it.
Use what he had. Yeah. So
and it worked.
Yeah, I know it worked. That movie's great. So yeah, you can do the same kind of thing. Like look around, use those strengths and what you have available to you to make the comics, man.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I do.
So aside from EynesAnthology.com, any other places that people should check you out online?
Yeah, sure. If they want to check me specifically out, they can just search for me on Twitter or Instagram. It's just Y2CL, the 4 characters. And you'll see my Twitter. I tweet about, well, right now, mostly the book and other stuff, but typically about things on my mind and like my kids and my artwork and stuff like that. If you want to follow the book itself, the book has a Twitter and Instagram. It's just at Eynes Anthology. And right now, both of those, we're pushing the book hard. We're going to be doing some cool special stuff on both those platforms. So if you follow both of them, you'll see everything we do. And there's a Facebook page, but I don't really use Facebook too much, so it's not quite updated as much as it should be. But it's there if you want to follow it there. And that's pretty much it.
Cool. All right, and again, when if you're listening to this, right after it's dropped, the Kickstarter will be live, so you can head right over and back the Kickstarter campaign right away. But John, this is great. Thank you so much for speaking with me about this. Like, I'm excited about this because, like I said, this is like one of the most buttoned up projects I've seen in some time. So it's you have all the ducks in the row. Everything looks like it's going to come together, and I'm excited to see where this book goes.
Thank you. I'm excited to see where it goes too, because I'm as you can tell, I'm very passionate about this book, and I really want to go far places.
Yeah. So, all right, that'll do it then for this episode of Funny Book Splatter. I have been James Ferguson, and my guest John Horlsey.